Okay, is this better? Hopefully. Okay, looks like we're actually getting something back on YouTube, which is fantastic. Okay, well, if everything is working in that capacity, then that means we can kinda... Hey, Random! Hi. Sorry, trying to get a lot of this stuff situated. This is only the second time that I've tried to do this. And we're trying to stream on both YouTube and Twitch. So obviously that's going to be a little bit tricky. So what we'll do here is put that there. Maybe I can just pop out, then pop out, and then close that. Yeah, that works a little bit better. There we go. This is what I'm doing right now. Yes. At least what I'm trying to do. Let's go ahead and close that down. Then I can pull this back up. And then we can go ahead and get this video going so I can actually start learning how to do this crap. How you guys doing? You guys having a good day? Enjoying yourselves? I'll tell you what, it's freaking gorgeous outside today. A little bit windy, but that's about it.
The link in the description. Then, obviously, you got to hit the big download button. Once downloaded on Windows, double-click it and then just go through the install steps. But if you're on a Mac, just drag it into the Applications folder. Then just find the Blender shortcut and open it. Then once it's open, just click anywhere off the splash screen to close it, and welcome to the wonderful world of 3D. First tip, do not get overwhelmed. If you go clicking around, you might find lots of buttons and some of them with very scary names, and it can all get very overwhelming very quickly. The thing you need to know is Blender can do a lot of things, which means it has a lot of tools, but you don't need to know every tool in order to do what you want to do. If you're familiar with the 80-20
so this first initial bit here is something that I have done before. I've actually done this tutorial before, but it was shit almost 8 months ago. So
we're just going to look at the interface, and
it's been a bit. I'm hoping that I'll be able to pick it up and then like fine-tune some stuff.
Is your 3D viewport, and it's
but
where you'll spend probably
we'll see.
90% of your time, because it is the 3D world. So you can see that we have three objects here. We've got a camera, we've got a cube, and we've got a lamp. And when we click on it, you can see it's selected because it has the yellow outline. So let's delete the default cube, of course, and replace it with something else. So we could do that by going up to the Add menu up here, or by remembering the hotkey, which is Shift A. So Shift A for Add. So usually the one you're looking for is underneath Mesh. So these are called your primitives, and it's what you use to start something when you're looking to make an object.
Plane, cube, circle, UV sphere, ice. I don't know if that's isosphere or icosphere. I don't know how they like to say it.
You're all very curious. You want to click it. It's
Sphere.
The monkey, so let's just click the monkey.
Such a weird word.
Why does Blender have a monkey? Well, fun fact, every 3D software has its own little random complex object because it's useful to test things like shaders or complexities of scenes. So 3ds Max has the Utah teapot, Houdini has the toy, and I think pig's head. Blender has the monkey, and it's actually called the Suzanne monkey head, which you can see in the top left there.
Random, I don't know if you're still here, but is this something that you've done before? And if so, what program do you actually use?
So let's get a better look at it. And to that we need to orbit, which you can do by on your mouse there, your scroll wheel. That is called your middle mouse button. If you push that in and then drag around, that is now orbiting.
Unreal 5. See, that's the thing, is like I completely understand wanting to use Unreal 5. Unreal 5 is like super intimidating to me just because of the amount of stuff that you can do in it. So I figured that Blender would be a good starting point for me.
Just left click drag on that. That will do the exact same thing. Or if you want, you can go to Edit Preferences, and then underneath Input, there's Emulate 3-button mouse. And that means that if you hold down Alt and then left-click drag, that will do the exact same thing. Also, whilst you are in User Preferences, you might want to go to Interface, and you've got Resolution Scale. If you're on a 4K monitor, you might find that your menus and buttons are really small and you kind of have to like squint in to see it. So personally, I like to keep my 4K monitor around about 1.5. Since this is a tutorial, I'll make it nice and big so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so that's orbiting around with the middle mouse button. If we want to zoom in, we can do that just by scrolling in and out. You could also do it by going up to the magnifying glass tool there, and then just left-click dragging and then moving the mouse back and forth. That does the same thing. Or you could hold down Control and then middle mouse button, and that will do a smooth zoom as well. Okay, so one thing you might notice looking at this is that it's not very pretty, right? It's just kind of got this flat, bland, gray lighting over everything. And that's because this state right now is called viewport shading. And it's kind of a lightweight, optimized way to view the scene just as you're building it. But if you want to create a final pretty image, that's called rendering. And you can actually switch into rendered mode by going up here into the top right-hand corner. You can see we're currently in the viewport shading mode. If we go 2 across, you should see rendered view mode. So if we click that, your computer might stall for a quick second whilst it loads it in, but you can see it's now different. We have directional light. We have shadow cast across the monkey. So it's now currently being lit by this lamp up here. So if I wanted to, zoom in on that lamp there and just kind of like move it around, you can see it's kind of hard to focus on. Like it's always exactly not in the right view. And that's because we are centered
that took a little bit
right now. We need to change the focus. We need to pan to something else. So we could do that one of 2 ways. One, if you're on a laptop, you could use the little move tool there. That will do that. Or everyone else, shift, middle mouse click, drag, that will do the same thing. So middle mouse is for orbiting, shift middle mouse is for pan to change your view to something else. Okay, so I want to move my light because it's too moody. I want to be able to see the monkey's face there. So to move an object, you could do it one of 2 ways. One, you could go over to the left-hand corner here and you've got the move tool. When you click that, you can see that the selected object, the lamp, has this gizmo, it's called, with these axes on it. And if I just clicked and dragged on any of those arrows there, you can see I can move it along any of those axes. I could also just click on that white circle there, and that will just freehand drag it depending on my view. But it's kind of tedious. Every time you want to move something, you have to like go to that tool and then find the arrows and yada yada. So actually most people in Blender prefer to use the hotkeys. So we just keep it in the default selection state here, and instead remember the hotkey, which is G for grab. Now I've just tapped the key and you'll notice as I move my cursor that it's now attached to my cursor. My cursor isn't even actually close to it. In fact, my cursor could be on the other side of the screen and I could tap G and it will move it. And at first this is kind of awkward. You're like, why is it working this way? But once you get used to it, you realize it's actually handy because you don't have to spend all this time like navigating your cursor to something just so that you can move it. Your cursor could be over here and then just tap it and you're moving it. So whilst you're in this move state, if you want to cancel a movement, you could do it one of 2 ways. You could just hit escape or you could right click. Then if you want to confirm a movement, like say I want to move my lamp here and I like the movement, I could just do a single left click. So again, if I want to cancel something, just right click. If I want to confirm the movement, left click. But let's say I wanted to move it along an axis, like, I like these arrows here and I want to be able to move it on just a specific axis. Well, I can do that whilst I'm in that grab state as well. So after I have hit the G key to grab it, I can then tap the letter of the axis that I want to move it on. So if you don't know, in the real world and in the 3D software, there are 3 axes because there's 3 dimensions. There's the X axis, which I can move it by hitting the X key, the Y axis to move it back and forth along the Y axis with the Y key, or the Z axis to move it up and down on the Z axis. So you can remember those letters, the X, Y, and Z, or the method that I actually prefer to use is whilst you're in that G state, if you just hold down the middle mouse button and then pull out, you can see you get this like gray line that pulls out from the center. And then if you just drag out and move around, it will snap it to the nearest axis, which again is maybe an odd way to work, but it's actually really handy because it means you don't have to think of the letter and locate it on your keyboard. I can just tap G to move it and then middle mouse drag out and then just find that exact axis that I'm looking for. And so it's very fast to just quickly move the lamp exactly where I want it. By the way, if you're finding it hard to remember all of the keyboard shortcuts that I've mentioned, I've actually put together a PDF, a cheat sheet of Blender's most common hotkeys, and you can download that by clicking the link in the description, so you could print it out or you could just have it on a separate monitor while you work. Also, if you are from another 3D software package, you might notice that Blender's hotkeys are different than what you are used to. So if you actually go to Preferences, just for those people that are from other softwares, if you change the key map to industry compatible, you'll find that these shortcuts are probably more in line with what you remember from other software. I'll also put a link to a cheat sheet that is just for the industry compatible key maps that somebody else put together. I've got nothing to do with it, but I'll put that link there so you can check it out as well. For the rest of this tutorial series, I'm going to use Blender's hotkeys. Just keep that in mind. Now let's say as I am moving around here, I'm like, oh, this looks really good. I've got some nice Rembrandt lighting across the monkey's face. I want to take a photo. I want to take a nice pretty image of this and post it on socials for clout, right? Well, I could take a screenshot of it, but that would be silly because it's got all these lines all over. It's all noisy, right? We don't like it. The way you take a photo, a pretty image in Blender, is to do a render. So you could do that one of 2 ways, by going up to render and hitting render image, or remembering the hotkey which says next to it F12. So when you do that, a little window will pop up. It will use your CPU or GPU, depending on which renderer you've got active, and it will render out a pretty image. And from here, you could go image and then save as, and it'll save it as a PNG or whatever, wherever you want to save it. But you might notice looking at this that this is actually a different view than what we have here, right? So here I've got a nice view of the monkey's face, but there is a different view. And the reason for that is when you do a render, it's not rendering from the view that you're looking at currently. It's always going to render from the point of view of the camera. So this is our camera over here, and it's looking from this angle. And we can actually look through the camera by just clicking the little camera icon there, or by remembering the hotkey, which is number pad 0. So how do we move the camera? Well, Blender's a little awkward, maybe a little different to other software packages, but you're supposed to like hit G to move it and then like middle mouse to zoom in and out. And then if you want to like move it along an axis, I guess G and then X. You could do that, but actually what a lot of users prefer, especially those from other software packages, is if you've got your camera selected, which by the way, I haven't mentioned this, but up here, this is your outliner. It's kind of an inventory of every item that you've got in your scene. Okay, so with the camera there selected, if I hit N, N is to bring up the properties, N for properties for whatever reason, and then go to view. There's a little box there that just says lock to camera to view. So now with that active, if I just use the same keyboard shortcuts as before, middle mouse button to orbit around, shift middle mouse to drag it, you can see that the camera is moving with it. So essentially the view, I can set it up exactly as I want, then hit N again, and then I can disable that. And then now as I pull out, you can see that the camera will stay exactly where it was, and I could do a lovely, pretty render. But this is too simple. If we post this on the internet, people are bound to make fun of us. Imagine that. Well, we could give it some color, right? So with our monkey head selected, we can go over to here to the properties. So this properties section is where you might spend the other, I don't know, another 5 to 8%, I don't know, getting too exact there. You might spend another 5% of your time in this section, but it's where all of the properties for things are in Blender. So for example, you've got like the render properties, like the size of the image that you're saving something as is defined there. And some of these properties will stay here no matter what is selected, but others are selection dependent. So you can see actually if I click the camera there, you can see I get a little camera tab at the bottom there. But if I select my monkey, you'll see the camera tab disappears, but instead I have some other ones that appear. So one that we might want to change is underneath material, and this will enable us to add a material, change the color to something else, essentially. So underneath here where it's got new, I'm just going to hit new. And then you've got a bunch of options, very confusing. Ooh, IOR, subsurface. Again, don't worry about it. We'll get to all of that later on. The one that defines the color is the base color. So if I do a single left click on that white box there, I can then change this color to whatever I want. I could make it an odd, creepy, skin-toned monkey head, right? Like that. And do a render. Okay, so hey, all right, it's better, but still it's too simple. I think people will think we haven't put enough effort into this masterpiece. So let's add another object. Let's give the monkey a hat. So if we want to add another object, how do we do it?
One of the things that I have realized,
or the hotkey Shift A.
Let me pause this real quick. One of the things that I've kind of realized with this tutorial is that, like, I know that these are just kind of introducing you to the basics, but I think it's a little bit strange, in my personal opinion, that like taking a screenshot is one of the first things that we're learning how to do. I mean, we have learned how to add a mesh, or add an object using a mesh. We've learned to pan and orbit around the object. And then we've also learned how to use the grab tool, and then it's immediately about the camera and taking a screenshot. I just, like, in my head, it feels like that's just a little bit out of place. Like, I personally wouldn't necessarily care about how to take a picture of the thing that I'm making until a little bit later. But maybe that's just a personal preference. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that's just a me thing, or if anyone else might think that's a little bit like, yeah, sure, it's still good information, but why are we having that right at the beginning of the basics of how to do everything? I don't know. Like I said, maybe that's just me, but
this is too simple. If we post this on the internet, people are bound to make fun of us. Imagine that. Well, we could give it here to, I don't know, another 8 times 8.
Because, let me fast forward. I went back a little bit too much.
Still, it's too simple. I think people will think we haven't put enough effort into this masterpiece. So let's add another object. Let's give the monkey a hat. So if we want to add another object, how do we do it? Well, we could go to the Add menu, like I mentioned before, or the hotkey Shift A. So what sort of hat do we want to add? We could do a boxy hat. Let's do a party hat with a cone. So once we've added that object, you can see it's just plopped it straight in the center, intersecting our monkey. So we need to move it. We can move it, and we could grab it with the G key. So it's now moving it just on our cursor there.
That would be the Z axis.
Because I like the position, but I just want to move it up. So I'm going to hit Z to move it along the Z axis. Right, I like it there. So once I like the placement, I'm just going to do a single left click. Okay, great. But too big. See, we need to learn another tool, which is scale. So we could go to the scale tool there, and then we get this familiar little axes there. But again, most people prefer to remember the hotkey.
He says familiar.
Which for scale is just S. So S to scale. So resizing that. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's move it down again.
What,
so
probably
G and Z.
To there.
All right.
And
G
again.
Let's say we want to make it a little taller. Okay, so we could scale it along just the Z
Bring
axis.
it down a
so
little bit.
S and then Z. Whoops. S, Z. There we go. And it's now making it a tall party hat. Scale it down There we go. Ha! Look at that. Be a very bland party if it's grey though. So let's give it another material. An exciting color. A vibrant aqua color. Why not? Give that a render by hitting F12. Okay. Camera is in the wrong position. So let's go to camera view mode with number pad 0. I'm going to select my camera. And rather than dabbling with that little
Then click
thing,
on that. We're already on the
F1,
materials
hit
tab.
G,
Go there,
then
and we'll
middle
just
mouse,
go.
Just tap it once. As I said, it's a little awkward. Blender's the way it handles with the camera. But anyway, just move that out, and then I got to rotate it. All right, so I'm going to rotate. So with the camera selected, tap R, then middle mouse.
Yes, this is what I'm doing.
It's now kind of like freehand rotating around. So I'll just move it up slightly. There we go. Okay, this is just a fool around session. So don't worry if you're making mistakes. We'll get to actual practical building stuff in the next part. I'm just trying to find ways to throw in these like fundamental tools. Rotate, right? The monkey's head is just, he needs to look dead on at the camera, and currently he's off. What an excuse to use the rotate tool. So you could enable the rotate tool, right? The familiar axes there. You could click and rotate it around like that. Again, most people prefer to remember the hotkey, which is R to rotate, right? So it's now just freehand rotating on my cursor. Remember the axes, as I mentioned before, can be used for any mode. So the X axis will rotate it back and forth. The Y axis, tilt it, or Z, there we go, to turn it towards the camera. Just a little bit, right? And there you go, F12. And we've done it. Let's save it. Let's upload it to ArtStation, and then just wait for the recruiters, essentially. All right, let's start a new scene so that we can get ready for part 2, where we're going to actually start building our donut and learning some of the more core features of Blender. Now we know how Blender functions, let's start building that donut. So, as before, let's, well, first of all, just to repeat, make sure you are working with a new scene. Completely new scene, don't want any remaining monkey heads lying around. Let's begin fresh slate, and let's delete our default cube just with the delete key, and let's replace it with a new
Already
object.
ahead of
The
ya.
hotkey for that is Shift A. And as I mentioned before, you usually want what is underneath mesh because these are your primitives. So we want to start with something that most resembles what it is we're building. You know, if it was a house, you might start with a cube.
Have to get my
if it was a
phone
vase, you
charged.
might start with a cylinder. In our case, we want the donut-shaped one, although mathematicians call it a
So
torus.
Shift A,
So let's add
mesh, boom.
now, if I zoom in by scrolling up, we can see we have something resembling a donut. Looks like a pretty weak-looking donut.
Well, it's a
very
ring. It's not a
flimsy. Looks like
donut. Or at least
the
I
donut
think
before
it's a ring,
cooked,
not a
and you just
donut.
drop it into the vat, and it's just this little wispy thing. So, immediately after you do some actions in Blender, you have options to change it. And the options are hidden down here in the bottom left-hand corner. You see a little box, and if you click that box, you see options. And look, we can change the dimensions of our torus. Now, something to note is that these options in Blender only appear immediately after you have done that action. If you do another action, like say deselect your torus by mistake, it's gone, right? Because Blender has assumed you have moved on. You've accepted the state of your donut, and this is the one you want, right?
Which is
If
crazy.
you haven't done anything drastic or changed this object in some severe way, you can temporarily bring it back by hitting F9. I never actually remember that hotkey. I just remember that immediately after I have added an object, if I want to tweak it, now's my chance before I move on to something else. Okay, so we could change, you know, the size of it here. We can also change the resolution. I'll use the term resolution loosely. To make it higher or lower fidelity. And a mistake that a lot of beginners make, and I say this because this was
see.
the exact mistake I made way back in 2003 when I started learning Blender, is they go, well, I need a realistic looking donut, so I guess I need to go really high resolution. I remember my first project, one of my first projects was for a high school film project, and I wanted to have a close-up of a face. Didn't realize faces were going to be difficult, but I went really high poly, and then it was just an absolute nightmare to work with.
I can imagine.
The reason you don't want this is
And
that, for starters, things that are high poly are very slow to render, and they're very hard to work with if you want to tweak the shape of it. But also, as you learn and you grow with 3D, you'll discover that it is A lot easier to add resolution to
Also,
something
let me
later
know
on,
if
but
anything is too
difficult
loud
to
or
take it
too
away
quiet.
if you've already built it into it and you don't need it. So,
While
long way
I'm
to
doing
say,
this.
what we actually want is to have as few polys, these are called polys, as you can get away with. So I'm going to go with 32 major and 12 minor. And don't worry that it looks all jagged, because we will fix that in a moment. Now, the major and minor, this is really up to you, but I find that something that looks kind of chunky, like a fat donut, just looks really delicious. So I'm going with something around about this size, okay? And once I'm happy with this,
How does do 0.5?
I click off, the options are gone, and this is it. This is the donut that I am now working with. So how do we make this look higher resolution?
Yeah, we'll just go 0.5.
Well, one way is to use smooth shading. So if you right click with your object selected, go to shade smooth. And look at that, this is immediately better. Without getting too technical, this is kind of a fakery. It's sort of like the shader is telling the renderer that this is a really high poly dense mesh when it
Which
really
this
isn't.
is going to take a little bit longer because of the fact that oh wait, I didn't even. There we go.
Anyway,
There we go.
Technical, but basically means it's not going to add anything to your render time, but it's going to look smoother. And so this is generally what you want for something that is smooth and organic looking, like we want. If you were rendering like architectural or like hard surfaces, like later on we're going to put this on a counter, then the object would obviously want to be flat. But in our case, we're just going to use shade smooth. But you might notice that looking at this, especially if you go side on, that you've got this sort of jagged shape around here, right? So the silhouette is really breaking that illusion that this is a high poly or a smooth looking donut. But thankfully, rather than adding all of that complex density into the mesh itself and then making it hard to remove later on, there's another way through modifiers. So if we go over here to our properties, right, this very confusing, lots of option looking properties, click on the wrench, and this is the section called modifiers. And this is one of those object dependent things. So if you've got your camera selected, you won't see it. So it's only when you've got actual meshes that you might
I don't
see
personally like super chunky donuts. I like them to be a little bit like
use
bigger and
so up here,
have a little bigger of a hole in the middle of it.
Range of options here that can do a whole number of things. The one that we're looking for is underneath generate, and it is called subdivision surface. And it is a really common modifier that you use all the time. In fact, it's so common, it's actually, you can just immediately add it to any object just by hitting Control 1. But don't do that because we've already got it, so there. Now, some of you might have just discovered that your donut has disappeared.
So, like, the thing is that the funny thing is, I somewhat know what subdivision is, purely off of random memes that I've gotten on Twitter and TikTok about 3D stuff, because of like I've just seen a bunch of memes about like add subdivision when trying to like fix things or trying to get things to look better. So I only know a little bit about it.
If that is the case, you need to go to Edit, Preferences, and then underneath Viewport, where it's got Subdivision at the very bottom, Disable GPU Subdivision. That will then make the subdivision perform on your CPU instead of your GPU, which is maybe non-existent or not performing whatever. But disable that and it should appear. But if it's already working for you, don't disable it. Keep it going because GPU will be faster. So what exactly is this doing? Well, it's a lot easier to explain if we look at the shade flat mode, because we're not being tricked by the smooth shading there. If I set this levels viewport to 0, this is our original mesh. This is before we add the subsurface, essentially. When we increase this, you can see that it is adding resolution to our mesh. And the more I increase this viewport levels here, the finer and finer that detail becomes. So to explain it, because this is such a very, very common modifier, it's kind of important to understand how it's working. You can see that this is these squares here, these are called faces, by the way. And for each one of these faces here, as I add a level, you can see it's becoming 4 faces, right? And then now if I zoomed in on this one face here, if I do another level, that's now become 4 faces. And then if I zoom in again, it's now become 4 faces. So it's exponentially adding detail. And you might also know that it is smoothing it out as well. Like this jagged edge that we've got here, you can see now becomes smoother. So to quickly visualize that, if I just draw, like imagine you've got like a 90-degree corner, right? Like this. If you add a subsurf modifier, what it's going to do is it's going to add a point here, right? Because this is the extra detail. It's also going to take that point there and it's going to average it out. It's going to average it out between these points. And it's going to create another one there and another one there. So you go then from having that really hard corner there to having something that looks a lot smoother. So it's going to take a point and it's also going to change it to make it look smoother, generally speaking. So there we go. So now as I render, which you could go up there and render image, or remember the hotkey F12, you can see that that donut is now smooth, but I go back and you can see it's jagged. So the viewport, you want to generally keep it lightweight, and then the render time, that's where you want to get a really nice looking pretty image. So you want to often have two different levels. In our case though, I don't really think we need to go beyond one, even for our final pretty image, because this with shade smoothing turned on is good enough, and we're going to be adding more to the scene later on, so we don't want to make it too complex. So this is actually pretty good. Okay, so we have a perfect donut, and that's the problem. It's too perfect. You could spend decades trying to develop a machine in the real world that made a donut this perfect, and you never would. This is so mathematically precise that the eye will always see this as looking fake.
Yeah, so it'll look weird.
Things that are too perfect just look fake. So you have to spend time making things look misshapen and adding variation there, like you see in the real world, because your eye.
Chat, there's going to be an ad break here in about 40 seconds. Can't do anything about it. It's the way that Twitch works. But if you don't want ads, you can go ahead and go over to the YouTube channel that is currently streaming as well.
Click on different objects is called object mode, and I know that because in the top left-hand corner you can see we are in object mode. But if I click the drop down, you can see I get a number of other options here. And these options, again, will change depending on the object you've got selected. If I've got a lamp, my little light there selected, you can see I've only got object mode. My camera, I've only got object mode. But a mesh will give you extra options here. So let's enter into edit mode. Ooh. Right. Now, you can see our mesh, our object has become something that looks weird. It's got a bunch of little points on it with lines and very technical. Well, that's because this is actually what the mesh is made up of. These little points here, which you can click on just by selecting, are called your vertices. The singular term is called vertex. I never say that. I like to just call all of them vertices, regardless of whether it's one or two, just because you always get some comments that go, actually, it's called vertex if it is singular. Anyway, so these are called your vertices, and if you have two of them joined by a line, that is called an edge. And
I just completely missed what he just said.
Extra object mode. My camera,
oh yeah, that's right. It's getting out of object mode. Okay, that's right.
Extra options here. So let's enter into edit mode.
That's right.
Ooh.
Oops.
Right. Now, you can see
Sorry, Jet.
Our object has become something that looks weird. It's got a bunch of little points on it with lines and very technical. Well, that's because this is actually what the mesh is made up of. These little points here, which you can click on just by selecting, are called your vertices. The singular term is called vertex. I never say that. I like to just call all of them vertices, regardless of whether it's one or two, just because you always get some comments that go, actually, it's called vertex if it is singular. Anyway, so these are called your vertices. And if
I'm not too worried about that.
Joined by a line, that is called an edge. And if you have four of them forming a face, then it's called a face. So with these,
yeah, so like this would be a face.
The shape of my object by using the same hotkeys as before. And if I want to move this, then I would simply tap G, right? And you can see it's now attached to my cursor. And then if I want to confirm its movement, I just do a single left click, and there it is. Now, if I go back into object mode, like that, you can see that my mesh has changed, okay? And by the way, the hotkey for jumping in and out of object and edit mode is just tab, okay? So you can see it's just toggling between those two modes because it's so common that you want to just quickly change things, that is just easily accessible by that. Now, this is okay, right? But you can see it's like, it's got like some artifacting. It's like, it's not the greatest lump, right? So how do we make it look a little more natural? Well, I mean, you could, you move one, drag it out, okay, click, and then I move, the next one next to it, right? I'll move that out, and then I'll move this one out a little bit, and then I move this one, and it's like, okay, well, now I've got the thing, but it took me like 5 actions. Ridiculous, right? No one wants to do that. No one's got time for that. Thankfully, there is a tool in Blender just for this, and it's called proportional editing, and you can enable it up there in your toolbar. So if you enable that, now if I hit G and I move it out, you will see I get a little ring around my cursor there, and that is now changing the mesh around it. Now, a lot of people in my previous tutorials were like, I don't see what's going on. You have to have something selected first, and then when you hit G, you will see that little circle of influence. Okay, now this circle of influence, if I scroll up, you can see it's shrinking its circle of influence. And if I scroll down, it is expanding its influence. So it's only going to affect what is in that ring there, okay? If you are on, if you don't have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can also change the influence by using page up and page down. And if you don't have page up or page down because you're on a Mac keyboard, then what you would have to do is go to key map and then change
so like,
page up
okay,
and page down to something else.
With that being said,
so
have proportional editing on.
Guys,
if I click here, go
Get a
G,
mouse with a scroll wheel. I think
push this in a little bit, then that'll deform that section a little bit.
Life in 3D a lot easier. Okay, so with
and
this,
if we think about this, then sometimes whenever something like this were to happen, it would create some sort of a crease, yeah? So
okay, so already this is looking.
Then we go here.
Right? Because even if we were making a stylized world for a Pixar movie or something like that, you can't have
push this in a little bit as well. Then push this in. Then push this in a bit. Right?
Add a little bit of variation to the donut.
Then we maybe
just a little bit over here, and you can see that I am
push this way and create a little crease.
So I just want to make a little bit that sticks out. I can make a small circle just by scrolling up.
Right?
Like that.
Something like that?
Until you get something that looks a little more natural. You might want to make the
so we create a crease there.
We just drag that in with
then maybe down here.
And that's pretty good.
Push this down. Push this down. Push this down.
Like but there you go. That's pretty good for a donut. It's still kind of simple. It's not too detailed, but it's got just enough variation in it that it's more interesting to look at.
Then maybe we can have a small little bit.
Go back into edit mode with tab.
Up top here.
When they're sitting in the little vat thing, right? They're
so
only
a little
like half submerged, so
lump up.
Flipped. But it means
like
that the bit that's nearest to the surface is getting less heat. So essentially what I'm saying is the bit that's around the donut, the circumference of it is usually a little bit flatter. So donuts aren't like perfectly round all the way around. They're usually a little bit flatter. So what I want to do is I want to select these vertices along here, and then I want to shrink them. Now I could go around one by one like this, which is actually what I used to do when I was learning Blender.
Maybe not that much.
YouTube days.
Go here.
No tutorials. What I would do this if I wanted to select this. Silly, because there's a function, a tool for that, and it is edge select. So if you hold down Alt on your keyboard and then do a single left click on not the points, but on the edge, right, this little line here, you can see it's selected all the way around. So it's anything that's connected along that line is now selected.
We'll do something like that.
So if I want to shrink this.
Oh, sweet. Nice. Glad he's helping out a little bit.
We want to shrink it. We want to change
okay, I have to pause this real quick because he was just talking about edge select.
When I was learning Blender.
And I don't remember how to do this, so I need to need to pay attention to this.
What I would do this if I wanted to select this. Silly, because there's a function, a tool for that, and it is edge select. So if you hold down Alt on your keyboard and then do a single left click on not the points, but on the edge.
Yeah. The actual line. There we go.
So it's anything that's connected along that line.
And then we would have to.
So if I want to shrink this, right? What would I do? Well, I mean, yeah, you could like move it around, right? We want to shrink it. We want to change the scale of it. So we would use the hotkey S for scale. So S, and I'm going to scale that in. And I actually don't want proportional editing. So I'm going to turn that off and now scale in and just make it a little bit flatter. And there you go. See, it just feels a little bit more natural, doesn't it? Looks a little bit closer to what a donut.
So now we go to this.
By the way, don't worry if yours doesn't look
that's
exactly
okay,
like this.
right? That's all right. Actually, with that being said, I would like to have a little bit of a.
I'm just working on the fly as well, so just
a little bit of a.
Looks good. Maybe you think this is not misshapen enough, and you want to add more. Go for it, because it might actually turn out better than what mine is. Now, before we move to the next part,
turn proportional back on.
How to save. Blender, very, very easy. You just go save as, and you just get one file. It's called .blend. Very literal file extension. Really pushing the limits of what a file extension can be. That's almost a word, Blender. Anyway, .blend, and that's it. And then next time you open it up, it's exactly like it. It's not like ZBrush where you got like 4
something
or 5
like that.
different ways to save a project or an object or a tool or a...
Yeah, I didn't think so either.
Okay. That's
Bring that
save.
back.
Now, also, finally, I would say, if you need help,
I would like to have.
If you're stuck and then you leave a YouTube comment, you might
Let's do
not get
this.
a reply.
Let's grab
If
these
you really
3.
need help, I've got a Discord, so I'll put the link below. So there's like
push it out like that, and then we'll take these 3
donut help. So
and push it in.
Feel free to jump into that. And also, guys, don't beat yourself up. Like 3D is definitely a has like a steep-ish learning curve.
Has just a little bit more deformity to it.
Right
yeah.
Now. And it's really
yeah.
A lot of this stuff is very foreign. 3D is very unique. It's very different to a lot of 2D tools. But don't give up. Like it's definitely achievable to learn and self-learn at home. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to pay for a tutor. It's really easy to get help online nowadays. So do make use of that Discord. Post comments as well in the YouTube comments if you want to. But I hope you stay with it. So if you're ready to jump to the next part after you've saved your blend file, go ahead, click here, and I will see you there. Did you guys know that Blender 4.0 had a change that makes it more realistic by default? Or that there's a new technology that is going to expand the
save progress.
For 3D exponentially?
Save as.
Well, you would if you were on my free newsletter
Donut 2
called This Week in 3D. It's an email from me once a week with 3 to 5 things.
See, the last time that I did this was here. Let me turn this down a little bit.
Tool that I found.
The last time that I did this was before I got my new computer. And when I had my new computer, when I got my new computer, I didn't have all of the files that I used to have, as far as like the things that I have done. I have already done a donut once before, but now I am trying to relearn it just so that I can like get some of this stuff stuck in my head, because the goal is to be able to create some stuff on my own and not create stuff in terms of, I mean, who knows, maybe I'll try to do some like character type stuff at some point later on in a couple years, but like I'm more so trying to do things like D&D mini type of situations, like maybe some scenery, maybe some dice and deck boxes for Magic and stuff. Like I want to be able to make things, and in order to be able to make things I need to be able to create things. So
D. Now, when you hit that, you are in a placement state, essentially. Like it's duplicated, and it's now saying, where do you want to place it? Now, in our case, and actually often, you don't actually want to change its placement. You want to duplicate it exactly where it was. So you can cancel the movement by hitting escape or right-clicking. Now, when you do that, it looks like it's canceled the duplication, but you can see in your outliner, it has duplicated it. You've got 2 objects, but it's just in the exact same place, which is what we want. So first things first, we need to name them, or else we could get very confused very easily. So you can name an object by just double clicking it in the outliner and then just typing in the object. The other way you can name something, I'll just show you the second way. If you select the Taurus 0.001, that's your icing object. If you're in the 3D view, where your cursor, is over the 3D viewport, if you hit F2, that's another very quick way that you can name something without having to go up to the outliner to find your object. So with our icing object selected, let's go into edit mode by hitting Tab. So we want the icing on the top, which means this bottom half of our mesh here is redundant. Don't need it. So we want to delete it. So if we just dragged over the bottom here, you can see it looks like we've selected the bottom half of our donut, but if you were to move around, you would see, oh, we haven't actually. It's only selected, annoyingly, what is facing the camera. Where there's a mesh, it's not gone through the mesh. A lot of users find this annoying. I agree. Sometimes seems like that would be the more default one that would make more sense. But
this is where you go to the wireframe.
So if you want to select through a mesh, you can go up to here in your top navigation, toggle X-ray. If you turn that on, it's going to enable you to see through the mesh. And now, when I drag over it, you can see that I have selected all through the mesh as I move around it. By the way,
see, some of this stuff I'm still remembering as we're doing this.
It's hard to select.
You know what I mean?
It's easy to kind of accidentally select what is above it, and depending on what you've got at your end, that might have happened already. So another way to easily just look directly on the side-on of your donut is to just click one of these, like in your gizmo here, instead of just dragging around. Just do a single click on either the green one or the red one, the X or the Y. And now we're in that state. You can see it's flattened it, so it's put you in orthographic mode, which actually you can toggle to at any time, just over there, which just makes it easier to just do a single, all the way through the mesh, select. All right. Okay. All right. So we want to delete that. So just hit the delete key. You get an extra option here of what do you want to delete: edges, faces. You want the vertices. That's everything. And now we have, if we go back to object mode, and then let's turn off toggle X-ray as well. And you can see it's working. We got half the donut on top of itself. But as you move around, you can see you get some flickering. Now, this flickering happens, and it's actually a very common, it's actually a good warning sign to you as an artist, because it means you've got faces on top of faces, and the 3D software doesn't know which face it wants to render, right? So it's like sometimes saying it's the front face, no, the back
which
face,
I imagine is part of the reason why sometimes video games have glitches that happen in some of the rendering stuff. Maybe it has to do with a couple objects being right on top of each other, and then like
that's what it's called.
They're right at that edge to where it is, you know,
thickness
causing this type of aberration.
So we can do that with a solidify modifier. So adding another modifier. Make sure you've got your icing selected, not your donut. And then here where you've got add modifier, we're going to go generate solidify. Okay. Now it's made it worse. It's actually added a thickness to our mesh there, but it's actually done it the wrong way. So it's with the normals. Yeah, what is it? It's trying to put the extra bit inside the donut. So we can change that by just changing the offset here in the solidifier settings. Just drag that all the way to 1. Some of you might have actually found that it was correct before, just depending on which way your normals were. If that's the case, keep it at -1, but everyone else keep it at 1. We just want to make sure it's actually outside. Okay. Let's just increase the thickness a little bit too. Let's go, 0.025. That looks pretty good. And great, we've got what looks like a yarmulke on our donut. A perfectly straight edge little hat for our donut. So let's make this look more like icing. So the edge is wavy all the way around. So to do this is where we get into the fancy finger magic. Because you're typing
fancy finger magic.
Go into edit mode, and we can see straight away that we can't see the mesh, and that's because the solidify modifier is obstructing our view. So these little boxes here, as I mentioned before, like this is to hide it from viewport. But if you want to just hide it from your edit mode, which is the state that we are in right now, the box next to it is the one that you uncheck, which means in object mode, when you're tabbed in object mode, you can still see it, but edit mode, it's, whoops. It's temporarily hidden for you. So if I was to select one of these points here and move it down, you can see that it's working, but it would be, again, a lot of effort to go round and round and do these one by one. So we want to use that old familiar proportional fall-off tool again. So proportional editing on, and now as I move it down, let's just lower the slider way down here, and then let's pull this down. Okay, now we'll find issues. If we move to the side here, we can see the first issue we've discovered is that this is separating from our mesh here. And that's not what icing does. When it dribbles down, it follows the shape of the donut all the way down.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is snap, whoops, undo it a number of times, snap the vertices to our donut underneath it, right? So for that, we need to turn on snapping up here. Okay, now there are a number of ways to snap in Blender. The default way is increment, which just means the like the grid floor there. Like if you were to just like move it around, you can see it's just snapping to the grid floor. Not helpful. But we want to snap it to the face. And now with face snapping enabled, if we move this down, we can see, let's just look here, that the bottom bit is snapping to the face, but as you might have seen, the top bits, the rest of essentially what is inside of our circle of influence with this proportional editing, that's not being affected. Only the little point that we had selected was affected. So that's not what we want either. Normally that would be enough, but in this particular case, we want to also snap individual elements too. And let's go face project. Now, when we pull this down, you should see that these are also no longer clipping through the donut. But still, we have issues. Why is that? Well, it is actually working correctly. We can see these are not going through the mesh. So why does it look like it is? The reason for that is that there's actually just not enough information here.
So this is one of the things with this tutorial, and also having it on the side screen like I have it, is that it's so small, the video itself. And also awful quality for whatever reason. And I completely missed what he was talking about on how to snap.
Not helpful. But we want to snap it to the face. And now with face snapping enabled, if we move this down, we can see, let's just look here, that the bottom bit is snapping to the face, but as you might have seen, the top bits, the rest of essentially what is inside of our circle of influence with this proportional editing, that's not being affected. Only the little point that we had selected was affected. So that's not what we want either. Normally that would be enough, but in this particular case, we want to also snap individual elements too. And let's go face project. Now, when we pull this down, you should see that these are also no longer clipping through the donut.
So what is it that he does initially to make that snap there? So let's just go ahead and bring this back to increment, turn snap off. What is it that he does here to initially...
Icing does. When it dribbles down, it follows the shape of the donut all the way down. So what we want to do is snap, whoops, undo it a number of times, snap the vertices to our donut underneath it, right? So for that, we need to turn on snapping up here. Okay, now there are a number of ways to snap in Blender. The default way is increment, which just means the like the grid floor there. Like if you were to just like move it around, you can see it's just snapping to the grid floor. Not helpful. But we want to snap it to the face. And now with face snapping enabled, if we move this down, we can see, let's just look here, that the bottom bit is snapping to the face, but as you might have seen, the top bits, the rest
project,
of
and then we
what
grab
is inside of our circle of influence with this proportional editing, that's not being affected. Only the little point
so that is what he's talking about.
Affected.
That way it snaps to that. Okay.
Normally that would be enough, but in this particular case, we want to also snap individual elements too. And let's go face project. Now, when we pull this down, you should see that these are also no longer clipping through the donut.
Excuse me.
But still, we have issues. Why is that? Well, it is actually working correctly. We can see these are not going through the mesh. So why does it look like it is? The reason for that is that there's actually just not enough information here. So if we go side on, you can see, right, like we've got this point here, and then we've got another point down here, and then we've got this long stretch in between, right? So that means that this part of the donut, oh gosh, that goes that goes around like that is just not, there's nothing to snap it to, essentially. So what we need to do to fix this is just add more geometry. So these little vertices here, we need more of those vertices. So we can do that by actually using the subdivision surface modifier. Because although it is a modifier, you can apply the modifier. And the modifier currently is adding geometry, so let's just apply it. So to apply it, we just click this little drop down here next to the modifier and then go apply. Now, if we, nothing should have changed from this view because the same information is being displayed. But in edit mode, you should now see exponentially more faces, because here, where there was, one face before, you can see there's now a lot more, right? 4x, okay, 4x. Okay, so now if we pull down, we should see it is snapping. And if we go into this mode, you can see that it's now conforming to the mesh in a much more snug way, because there's information there for it to use. Now this shading artifact here that we can see, this don't worry about that, we'll fix that in just a moment. But I need to show, because I've shown you like 4 things that we need to enable for this to work. I got to show you one more, because if I pull down and if I scroll up, you'll see something. Okay, if I was to click, we get this horrible problem here, and I've done this tutorial enough, and enough people have hit this issue that I need to call it out specifically, because it seems to be a big point that a lot of people just don't know where to go from. What's happened is if we use what's it called, the circle of influence for our proportional editing, if that is so high, it's actually high enough to reach the mesh on the other side of the donut. And then because we've got snapping, it's now projecting that, snapping it to the front, which is creating this like something that's a nightmare to fix. In fact, it's easier just to start from scratch than to try to fix that. So if we want, sorry, there's a lot of noise. To fix this, we need to hide the part of the mesh that we don't want to be influenced by our proportional tool, right? So to do that, there is an easy way to do it. We can actually do it very precisely. So if with this middle bit of our donut here, if I just hold down Alt and then do a left click, as I mentioned before, that selects the ring, okay? And we could do that all the way up, but actually there's a little, I don't know if it's an Easter egg. It's kind of a cool tool that not many people know about. Control plus. That will enable the select more tool. And if you use control plus, control minus goes the other way, you can see that it's expanding out. So control plus will just like select.
Chat, I don't have that because I don't have a number pad on my keyboard.
And you can see we can very clearly select all the parts of the mesh that we don't need, right? Very cool. By the way, if control plus doesn't work for you because you're on a laptop or something else, select more, less. You can also do it here. Anyways, to hide this part of the mesh, it's H. H for hide. So when you're in this state, it looks as though it's been deleted. It's very, sometimes you don't know where part of your mesh, and then you forgot that you've got hide turned on. If parts of your mesh are hidden and you want to bring it back, it's Alt H. So H to hide and then Alt H to bring it back. Or if you can't remember it for whatever reason, you can also find it. Okay, it's underneath mesh. There we go. Mesh. Reveal hidden or hide selected. Okay, so that's the other way. But you can get my keyboard shortcut. It's in the link. It's free. Just use that and then you won't forget a lot of these handy shortcuts. All right, so now finally, after all that, after 4 different ways and problems to explain, we can now take part of this mesh and drag it down, and it will work correctly. Haha. So now we get to now finally be an artist and go like, what sort of, edge or what sort of icing do I want to make this look like? So what I'm doing here, by the way, is I'm hitting G to pull it down, and then I'm just single middle click, and then because my cursor is closest to the Z-axis, it's now snapping it to the Z-axis. So that's why I mentioned before that it's really handy. You don't have to think of the letter and type it in. You just go in the general direction you want to go, and then just tap the middle click of the, which is your scroll wheel, right? Middle click. It's such a weird button that you have to call it out. It's the scroll wheel button, because it's like no other application seems to use it besides scrolling. But Blender is like, no, we're going to use it for like 90% of the operations is going to be middle click. But anyways, as you can see, I'm not paying particularly too much attention to it, but I'm just making a wavy looking shape around it. You might also want to make some bits that go the opposite direction, right? And then maybe pull, so you've got like big shapes as well as medium shapes and some small shapes. Big, medium, small. It's the recipe for appealing design. Big, medium, and small details. But I digress. By the way, I should mention, if you're stuck, don't feel bad, because there was certainly a lot of finickiness going on with this donut here, and we're definitely in the steep part of that curve at the moment. Do make use of my Discord if you are stuck. I created it literally so that people could get instantaneous help. I don't have any other benefit for it, so it's there so that you can find help. Link is in the description, and there's like donut help chat room where you can post screenshots of your problem and then people can help each other out. So do make use of that. Now, our shading issue here, this darkened edge, is actually going to fix itself by fixing another issue. So it's a two birds, one solution kind of problem. This 90-degree edge here for this icing, not ideal. Everybody knows that a real icing would create like a rounded edge there, right? So we can fix that just by adding another subsurf modifier. Because you might remember I mentioned, like, yes, if you've got 3 vertices, it'll create like another vertex here and another vertex here, but it'll also like round it out. It'll pull this one back, so you end up with a rounded corner. So right here in your modifier stack, we're going to go add modifier, generate subdivision surface.
What happened here?
The order of these does matter. Okay, you want your solidify at the top and the subdivision after it. So Blender works top to bottom, and it's important it's in this way because you want the extrusion to happen first, and then in order to round that edge, it has to happen as a secondary step. So solidify on top, subdivision underneath. Now, whilst we're here and we're looking at the close-up,
there we go.
Nice little profile of this edge of this icing. Another issue to call out, you can see it's got this this shape that goes around. Yes, so far so good. But then it goes up, and it's like, it'll be better if it went around and then tucked in and touched the edge of it, because that would look more like real liquid would. So we can solve that by just changing one of the settings in the solidify modifier. It's not one of those things that you would figure out.
Did not want to do that.
Or know where it is. It's just over time you learn where some of these settings are. But essentially here, the edge data. So we want to change the edge data to say that before you do the solidify step, add a crease on the inner part right here. If we increase this all the way to 1, it now creates a...
So, again, this is where I get a little bit... Sometimes he goes pretty fast on this stuff while you're trying to, like, figure out some things.
Fixing another issue. So it's a 2 birds, 1 solution kind of problem. This 90-degree edge here for this icing, not ideal. Everybody knows that a real icing would create like a rounded edge there, right? So we can fix that just by adding another subsurf modifier. Because you might remember I mentioned, like, yes, if you've got 3 vertices, it'll create like another vertex here and another vertex here, but it'll also like round it out. It'll pull this one back, so you end up with a rounded corner. So right here in your modifier stack, we're going to go add modifier, generate subdivision surface. Now, the order of these does matter. Okay, you want your solidify at the top and the subdivision after it. So Blender works top to bottom, and it's important it's in this way because you want the extrusion to happen first, and then in order to round that edge, it has to happen as a secondary step. So solidify on top, subdivision underneath. Now, whilst we're here and we're looking at the close-up, nice little profile of this edge of this icing, another issue to call out, you can see it's got this this shape that goes around. Yes, so far so good. But then it goes up, and it's like, it'll be better if it went around and then tucked in and touched the edge of it, because that would look more like real liquid would. So we can solve that by just changing one of the settings in the solidify modifier. It's not one of those things that you would figure out. or know where it is. It's just over time you learn where some of these settings are. But essentially here, the edge data. So we want to change the edge data to say that before you do the solidify step, add a crease on the inner part right here. If we increase this all the way to 1, it now creates a sharpened edge just on that inner part there. So the rest of it is a smoothed edge, but the middle one, there's a crease, so it's making a sharp edge there. And it just gives it, it's just a little bit more realism. Just looks a little bit closer to what you would imagine real icing would do. Okay, now for the cool bit. All right, so if you look at reference of donuts, right, yes, you've got these little wavy bits, but where the icing is really liquidy, it'll often break off from this wave here, and it'll create a trail that goes down underneath the donut, right? It just sort of drips all the way down. Whoops, bumped the microphone. So we can do that, but not the way we were doing it before. If we just took one of these points and then like dragged it all the way down like that, there wouldn't be enough information there, right? You can see you just get this like stretched look, and it doesn't look great, okay? So essentially we need to give it more information, and we couldn't just do it by like adding more and more subdivision surfaces. We need to actually like break this shape here and create a new shape that goes down. So we need to extrude. So if I select this vertice and then the one next to it by holding down Shift, I don't think I mentioned it, but yeah, if you want to select two things at once, it's Shift select. Anyways, so if we select two vertices like that, we want to extrude it downward by hitting E. So when you tap E, it's similar to G in that you're in a placement state now, saying where do you want to place this? So I'm going to move it down to, yeah, like about there where I want the trail to stop, and I'm just going to do click, left click, and it's now placed it there. Now, it's hard to see it, but if I just switch to wireframe, you can see what it's doing. So it's created this breakaway shape here, an entirely new face that's completely separate to what we've got there currently. And what this means is if we go to object mode, you can see it's not just like continuing this form here, it's pulled it down, right? Which is exactly what we want. And in fact, I want it to go even further than that. So I'm going to select those two vertices, and I'm going to pull it down again, and then I'll do it again. And the reason I've done this 1, 2, 3 is that this detail here is important so that it conforms to the shape of the donut. Because if there's not enough, you're going to have that clipping issue that I showed you earlier. So that's pretty good. And now we're going to do it again. Originally in my earlier versions of the donut, I only did like one of these, but then I noticed that in the render, the final render, it's often the most interesting part of the donut. So now I'm thinking, yeah, just do it all the way around the donut. Just add the bit that looks cool. Add more of that. So here, so wherever there's essentially like a big dip is what I'm looking for, like where the liquid would sort of build up and then like the surface tension there would be just too much, and then it would break away and it would go down underneath like that. And we'll do another one here, why not? Like that, and down and down. And that's pretty good. Haha, lovely. So that concludes finally this heavy part of the tutorial. So if you're ready to watch the next part, I hope you're not giving up. You can click there on the screen and I'll see you there. Make sure you hit subscribe as well if you haven't. A large number of you don't. But if you want to see more Blender tutorials, that's what you need to do. Self-promotion right there. Thanks guys, see you in the next part. Congrats, you didn't give up. You made it to part 4. You clicked on the next part of the video. There's always like less viewers each video as you go down. So you're here, well done, thumbs up. As you can tell by the title of this video, we're going to learn about sculpting. But first, I should call out, if you have a problem with your mesh now, those problems can be amplified the further you go along. So it helps to do a technical check now, make sure you don't have any problems before we move along. So to look for it, go into edit mode. And first of all, by the way, if you can't see that middle part of your mesh, it's because you remember we temporarily hid it. So you can bring it back by hitting Alt-H, and that will bring back the rest of the mesh. And then we're looking for issues with the mesh, like right here. So this is a really common problem following this tutorial, because when you're projecting parts of the mesh, if it was like side on to the camera, it will project it that way, and then you can have like overlapping parts of the mesh. So that creates this artifact here, which will be exaggerated when we add more detail to it. So we just want to drag that back. So turn on snapping, and I'll keep proportional turned off, and then I'm just going to move this back over here just to move each of these points back. Another very common problem is you might have parts that have separated from your mesh. Now you can quickly fix this if you just like selected the point and then
there we go.
Hit G to move it. When you're in that state, it's also snapping it to the mesh. Now you could do that all the way along, like select, tap G, then click.
All right, chat. I think I am actually going to take a break from this for here. I'm basically trying to make sure that I do about an hour of this here and there. I kind of wanted to get started on it and just wanted to try to push myself to do a little bit more. In order to like actually get started with this stuff. So yeah, I'm actually gonna take a break from this for now. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out. I really appreciate it. I know that like only streaming an hour isn't like a lot of time, but I'm partially doing this so I can keep myself in check and so I can make sure that I am actually doing the work. This is something that I'm trying to push myself towards and push myself to do. So I hope you guys join on the next one. And if you guys are trying to do this as well, then good luck to you. And I hope that you succeed. Keep trying to do this. I may do this again tomorrow. I'm not sure, but I will give you guys a heads up. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and save this real quick. And I will see you guys later. Bye.